Part 1 of this series explained what the drag function synthesizer is, how to use it, and how it benefits shooters. In Part 2, I'll show how to export custom drag functions to Ballistic Explorer, compare them to other data, and use them to perhaps increase your accuracy in the field. I'll also show you some of the anomalies you may discover when using the drag function synthesizer. I'm going to show how we export drag functions to Ballistic Explorer. So I'm going to go ahead and load up one of the Sierra bullets, the Sierra 30 caliber 168 grain Match King. So I have two folders with mostly the same data, but I want to show an issue here that when you export drag functions you might be interested in. So here we have the output from the Hornady 4 degree of freedom calculator, all at 25-yard increments. And so I'm going to select this first. I'm going to process all three of those files. And you'll notice that we have a wavy line here down around the speed of sound. The synthesizer is having difficulty following this curve, partly because the 4 degree of freedom calculator rounds velocity to the nearest foot. And as we go around this knee in the curve here, just a slight change in data can cause some of these issues. So if you see that when you're processing data for a drag function that you want to export, you want to experiment with possibly changing your increments. So that's what I've done. And this lowest velocity file, I've exported that with 30-yard increments. The other two are still at 25, and we'll see the difference. I'll process those. And so here we can see it smoothed it out simply by changing from 25 to 30-yard increments. So now we're going to select the Export Drag Functions tab. Now you can only export drag functions if you have a registered copy of Ballistic Explorer installed on your machine. If you have more than one copy of Ballistic Explorer, you want to run the copy that you intend to use, and it has to be version 6.60 or higher in order to handle custom drag functions. So the instructions here are telling us, okay, be sure you set your bullet weight and diameter, which I forgot to do. Also, when you set your diameter, don't use the caliber name. If it says 30 caliber, it should be 0.308 inches. And you can see we have other 6 millimeter, use the 0.243 or the 6.17 millimeter. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to set my caliber and weight properly. So this is a 168 grain bullet and 308 inches. And so I'm going to process that again. And we're going to export. Now we have to give it a table name. And one way you can do that is give it a letter and give it a caliber and a weight. But we're restricted to 7 characters here. And if you use caliber and weight, oftentimes you will find that you end up with duplicate names, and you do not want a duplicate name. That can cause some issues in Ballistic Explorer. It'll actually append a number like 1 or 2 or 3 when it finds a duplicate so that they are unique. But it's just best practice to give it a different, make sure it's a unique name. And so what I'm using, it's just like some of the manufacturers do. They have a product number, has nothing to do with the particular caliber or weight of the bullet. So the product number for this Sierra bullet is 2200. So I'm going to go S2200. And then you can enter a description. And I'm going to just say Sierra 0.308 168 grain Match King. And if you know the length of the bullet, go ahead and enter it. Otherwise, leave it set to 0. It's only used to calculate spin drift in Ballistic Explorer. I looked it up, so I'm going to go ahead and enter it. And now we're ready to export. So here we've exported this file, this drag function file to this folder. And now I'm going to go ahead and open up Ballistic Explorer. And the first time that you export drag functions to Ballistic Explorer, you go up to Options and Custom Drag Functions. You'll see that it's added this folder and it's checked it for us. So we'll go ahead and use that. And I'm going to load that into Trace 2. So remember the name that we gave it, S2200. So here it is. If you're wondering about a particular drag function in here, you can select it and click Info. And it'll tell you the folder it came from and some other information about it here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and select that. So we've got it selected by default with a BC of 1. So that's now in Trace 2. And I'm going to come over to the drag function analyzer. And we now have it in Trace 2, the custom drag function. So I'm going to give it a name here so we can keep track of it. So we're going to call it the S2200 custom. Okay. So now we can see by itself here as the stepped BCs. You can see the actual list of them over here. This is what Sierra uses. They use G1 and they give you a stepped BC or a multiple BC for different velocity ranges. And that's what it looks like in the drag analyzer. So now we add the custom drag function, and you can see how they match up pretty good, and the steps that Sierra has given to their G1 correct for the difference between what Hornady found with their Doppler radar and what how this bullet actually flies, and Sierra discovered that too. So we actually have two sources of data suggesting this is really how this bullet flies. So now let's go look at some data. Down in the examine display, we're showing drop in MOA. And as we can see, once we get out to 1,000 yards, the custom drag function in Trace 2 versus the stepped BC in Trace 1, we've got about a quarter of a MOA difference, 0.26. That's about one click on many scopes. By 1,100 yards, we're 0.5 MOA difference. By 1,200 yards, we're over 1 MOA difference. Let's see what velocity range we're in. Click the Velocity tab. So we're in the subsonic range. If we go back up to the drag analyzer, you can see that the custom drag function has a lot more drag in those velocity ranges than the stepped BC has. And so one of the things we can do, if we assume that the custom drag function has truly captured how this particular bullet flies, we can go off to Trace 1 and we can modify the stepped BC to see if we can make a better match. So I'll add one more step to it at 1,400 feet per second. And I'll set that down to, we need more drag, so I'm going to get a lower BC. And let's check and see how that looks. So we come back down, look at our numbers. I'm going to look at drop. So you see we're getting improvement in here. And you can see how the step that we've added improves, how they match. But we can see this step just above it could probably be a little larger step to help us in these lower velocity ranges. So we'll come back up and go in, and we will change this to, let's try 3/8 and say OK. Come over here to the drag analyzer. When I click on it, you'll see the step change. There we go. Let's look at the data again. So we're getting improvement as we do that. And like I said, if you assume that the Doppler radar and the drag synthesizer has captured the true flight pattern of that particular bullet, and if you're in the field with a handheld instrument that measures absolute pressure and humidity and temperature and other factors like wind, and may not be able to use this custom drag function, and you're stuck with a G1 stepped or a G7 step, at least now you have some tools that you can use, that you could modify a step or tune it so that you would get better results in the field, showing just one of the things we can do by importing these custom drag functions into Ballistic Explorer. So now I'm going to close Ballistic Explorer. We're going to go back to the drag function synthesizer, and we're going to load up Hornady bullet. I'm going to load up the 6mm Hornady here, 6.5mm, excuse me, the 143 grain ELDX. We had that loaded before. Like I say, unless you're going to export drag functions, you don't need to set the weight and diameter. Do a run. We've seen this drag profile before, and now I'm going to show you what it looks like at higher velocities here. Something strange going on. So you can see we've got a strange occurrence going on here at these high velocities, and all this really means, in my opinion, is that at some point here we've tested it to Mach 3.5, or Hornady's tested it to Mach 3.5, and yet I set the 4 degree of freedom calculator because I wanted a muzzle velocity of 4,600 feet per second, and it may not be tested in that area, and so the calculator has to do something, and it followed a higher increasing drag path that probably doesn't reflect the real bullet. And this little jog here, this is actually the synthesizer itself. It was looking at this slope, and once we ran out of data at 4,600 feet per second, it just assumed we're going to go ahead and maintain the same slope. So if you see these anomalies above muzzle velocities that you're going to use, you can just ignore them. They're probably artifacts from the testing procedures, and what's really important is what's in the velocity range that you're actually going to use. And so that's an important thing to remember. Let's look at another example. So this time I'm going to select a Burger bullet, the 30 caliber 215 target hybrid, selected file, process. So as we get into the higher velocities, here you'll see we have a different kind of a jog. The same thing is going on here. We're getting up into velocity range that possibly Hornady didn't test at, and I set the 4 degree of freedom to 4,600 feet per second. Calculator had to do something, so it went with this particular drag curve here, and then the synthesizer assumed, well, we're going to keep on with the same slope, and so we got the second jog here. And so this is the kind of anomalies we see when we run out of data supported by the actual testing. Nothing to worry about as long as you remember that and you're not trying to interpret what's going on up here as being coming from actual testing. You would normally not ever see this kind of a path here. The bullet would have to be doing something very strange to follow that kind of a drag profile. So I thank you for watching this video.